Hi, Tom. Good to see you. How are you?
Very good. Good to see you, Simon.
Thanks so much for making the time to do this with me. I guess before we get started, I normally just do a quick sort of set of introductions so everybody knows who we are and what we're talking about. So I'm Simon Spire, founder of Data Agents. We work with marketers who are sitting on more data than ever, starting to use AI tools, but struggling to make faster, better decisions. So we're trying to close the gap between data and decisions for marketers so they can focus on outcomes first and worry less about technology and data. And this sort of series of conversations, things that I'm doing with people who are experts in actually what moves the needle when it comes to data-driven marketing. So everything from performance marketing and acquisition through to retention and CRM. And there's no panels, no presentations. It's just honest advice from people who've done it at the cutting edge. And I know, Tom, you've done a load of work in the sort of retention space. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon. Yeah, so Tom Burrell. I run a retention consultancy slash agency. I've been in retention for 26 years, 13 years in senior roles in agencies, including global CRM director at a big publicist group agency for 7 years. I also, after that, spent 8 years client side, including 3 as senior vice president of retention at the Zone Group. In the last 2.5 years, I've had my consultancy slash agency. I call it a consultancy slash agencies because we kind of do two different types of work. So one is advising exco teams on driving improvements in retention through the whole, what I call the retention hierarchy of needs, which we'll get into in a moment, which is about thinking about how you improve retention across product proposition, acquisition, moments of truth, and then CRM as well. And then on the other side is AI execution. So how do you leverage AI systems to drive better customer interactions? And that tends to sit more on the CRM side. So thinking more about kind of one-to-one, truly one-to-one communications, that promise of one-to-one has been around for about 20 years, but never been fully able to be delivered, but now it is. And so I work with clients in that space. Most of the businesses I work with are and this kind of reflects my last decade of work really, are in like high usage recurring revenue sectors. So things like streaming, gambling, sports, apps, subscription apps, publishing, those types of sectors. But time to time I do work with other brands. For example, I worked with Emirates Airline last year, but that's my core focus. And that's where my thinking, I think, applies best.
Yeah. No, that's great. Retention is something I've spent a long time working in as well, and kind of where I wanted to start the conversation. I think retention often gets sort of interchanged with CRM, whereas I think my view, and it's probably yours, is that retention is actually a business problem or a business opportunity. And I think, like you were saying, it's about product proposition, audience, links to acquisition. CRM's very much the sort of uh, execution of elements of it. I guess, do you think that's the case? And where does sort of the retention battle get won and lost in the businesses that you've worked with?
Yeah, look, I think you're spot on with what you say, right? So a lot of people just assume retention equals CRM, and that can actually be quite challenging, I think, for some CRM directors in certain organizations because they can be made responsible for a KPI like churn, but not control all the levers that actually drive that KPI. And so, look, the most successful CRM directors that I know, like take a kind of all-encompassing view of the way in which they approach their discipline. So what I mean by that is they understand that their function that they're responsible for is not what solely drives retention. They know that if they can do it well, then it will drive an impact, and they do the best that they can to drive the best impact that they can. But they also surface conversations to the right people within the organization, including their leadership, around where problematic aspects exist within the retention hierarchy of needs, impact on retention holistically and impact on the KPI that they're often held accountable for. And by doing that, they raise their profile above their discipline. It's obviously a great pathway for career expansion, but also more importantly for the business they're operating with, it allows them to actually impact that KPI. And so just to kind of unpack that a little bit, I write a lot about and talk a lot about and work a lot with my clients, and particularly the exco leadership clients I work with, around the retention hierarchy of needs. So like the foundation is your product and proposition. So what are you offer and to who? Obviously pricing plays a part in that, but this is all about customer product fit, not product market fit, customer product fit. And there'll be different cohorts that different level of fit for your product and service. And that kind of moves into the sort of the second layer on the pyramid, on the hierarchy, which is acquisition quality. So
Yeah.
many brands have acquisition teams and retention teams, which are just completely and utterly separated. They might report into a CMO, but they operate mostly in silo. And a lot of organizations that that I've worked with, I've found that they don't employ customer lifetime value to drive their acquisition strategies. They optimize for volume and they minimize acquisition based on CAC. And the performance team are all incentivized to acquire the most amount of customers for the least amount of money. And now the problem with that is that in any given market, there's always many, many more low value customers than there are high value customers. So if you optimize for CAC, then you're going to acquire a lot more of those low value customers. Take a customer lifecycle lens to your acquisition strategies. For the same budget, you'll acquire less customers, which can feel kind of uncomfortable for people, but you will be able to acquire better quality customers. And what it does is it allows you to outspend your competitors on those customers that have the highest lifetime value. And then that directly obviously impacts onto retention because you are acquiring customers that have a better customer product fit. And then right at the very top of the hierarchy is what I call moments of truth. There are moments in the relationship that make or break retention. And they could be product friction moments. I had a client last year that I was working with. A chunk of their customers could not log in to the app, right? Even with the password reset mechanism. Of course, right? You're not going to retain those customers, right? So that's a very simplistic example, but there's often multiple aspects of product friction that cause frustration amongst customers that mean that they don't stick around. And then the other aspect of moments of truth is like those service experiences. And I've seen a lot of organizations take the view that they're customer centric. So they're a customer centric organization. And to them, that means every customer is important. And so from a servicing perspective, you treat everybody the same. But actually, that's not customer centricity. Customer centricity is thinking about the value that the customer provides to the organization and treating those customers differently to the ones that provide very minimal value. There's no point in over servicing customers that are unprofitable to you, for example.
Yeah.
And this is not about giving bad service. This is just about making sure you protect the value of those customers that make the greatest contribution to your business. And service friction, particularly for high value customers, is a big problem. And whether that be a chatbot that can't answer your question properly, or whether that's like 45-minute wait time after you've been a loyal customer for 10 years, or also in that kind of like service experience type space as well. I often think about recognition. So customers, when they have had a long tenured, and particularly the types of recurring revenue business I work, a long tenured relationship with a brand, they expect the brand to recognize the value that their customer provides. And I always talk about this example that was on the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, where one of the big telcos over in the US did a big ad, which was promoting an offer they had, and it said in the Super Bowl, not available to existing customers in a Super Bowl ad. And this is like you're alienating your most valuable customers at that point with that kind of message, right? And telcos are generally pretty bad at that, actually. But the broader point is, how do you kind of recognize the value that those most valuable customers provide to you? And so a lot of the work that I do with the exco teams that I work with is around that whole hierarchy and working out where the gaps are in order to improve retention holistically.
Yeah. It's a great model, and there's obviously quite a lot sort of wrapped up in it. And I think um, at the heart of, I suppose, actually getting it adopted in the sort of businesses that you work with, it's about the organization and a bit of a cultural change, so that it's less about an acquisition team and a retention team. And I suspect it also has to be driven by a CEO or an MD down, or is it more the CMO that owns sort of retention? That is quite a sort of interesting and I guess sort of foundational thing in terms of who owns retention and how does everybody line up behind the right KPIs and the right behaviors.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I often talk to people and when I talk about this model, I think, well, then retention is everything. And then therefore, it's the CEO's job. But actually, I don't generally think it is the CEO's job. Obviously, the CEO is going to be like attentive to it, but you need somebody on that ExCo leadership team that is accountable for the change. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily responsible for all the functions that drive it. So sometimes it's a CCO, like Chief Commercial Officer, because obviously
Yeah.
they're the ones ultimately accountable for that KPI. And I've worked with several projects with CCOs or with strategy directors as well, because obviously it's often at that senior leadership level, at that exco level, you'll have a strategy director, which is then responsible for bringing all those functions together around a broader organizational strategy. And then in some organization, it does sit with the CMO as well. It just depends on the dynamics of the organization. But what I would say is retention is an outcome of a leadership decision, and wherever that leadership decision sits, obviously the CEO needs to be brought into the program, right? Because they're going to be able to give that CCO, CMO, strategy director the support to be able to make the changes that they need to when they sit outside of that individual's jurisdiction. So obviously a commercial CCO or CMO won't have ownership of service. Typically that sits under operations, won't have under ownership of product. That typically sits under the CPO, but they need to be able to influence those teams. So it does require the sponsorship of the CEO, but accountability amongst another exco member.
Yeah. And I'm obviously a data guy, and so I've got sort of two data thoughts that would be good to explore. One is, I think, like you were saying, your best customers should be an acquisition channel in their own right, in terms of they're your fans, but also if you understand who they are, you can go and find more people like them. So it'd be great to understand, where you see businesses who've done that successfully. And then my other thought, again, you were talking about lifetime value, which I agree is the thing that everybody kind of needs to line up behind. From an acquisition point of view, there's also, I guess, the sort of imperative to understand the potential lifetime value of a customer as well. And, being able to identify that earlier so that then the decisioning in terms of those uh, service decisions that you make and the service propositions and the product propositions and so on all fall out of that. So yeah, I guess just sort of two threads that it'd be good to explore. One around how do you use your best customers as an acquisition channel? And secondly, how do you kind of figure out the potential value in the base that you've got and people who you've perhaps only just started to build that sort of relationship with?
Yeah. So I'll answer the first question second, and the second
Yeah, of
question.
course.
So like, ultimately, I think everything comes back to customer lifetime value, and there's two aspects to that. So one is a mentality shift, because particularly listed companies will chase short-term profits over long-term value, and sometimes those are in conflict. But even as a listed customer company, you can trade, as a leader that's come into an organization relatively recently, you can build a program that focuses on lifetime value at the short-term expense of short-term profits that then drives growth over the long term. And there's a brilliant case study on T-Mobile that were like 35 million customers flat for like 8 years, implemented a program of customer centricity, and within 7 years had 135 million customers and changed all aspects of the product proposition, everything based on the customer centricity. The guy who joined was a ex-Bain consultant, became the CEO and just implemented this program. And obviously Bain are responsible for NPS, which is kind of debatably the key measure of customer centricity and advocacy. Mm. But ultimately, I think it comes back to customer lifetime value. And most organizations don't calculate customer lifetime value correctly. Quite often they'll calculate it based on just summing historic spend, and they say this customer's worth this customer's worth that. But actually, customer lifetime value is the future value of your existing customer base. So it's how much, because the money that you've already banked from your existing customers is kind of irrelevant in a way, because that's already banked. It's the future value that your existing customers provide. And so to calculate customer lifetime value, you have to have both a forward-looking predictive lens on it, alongside a backward-looking historical spend pattern, which will allow you to build that forward-looking predictive lens. Like you, I'm very much a data guy, by the way. When you build that customer lifetime value model correctly, that can drive all aspects of your business. So it can drive your acquisition strategies, and as we talked about, kind of finding lookalikes of those highest value customers. It can drive service differentiation within your operations. It can drive how you prioritize experiences within your product, by understanding the most important friction moments for those most highest value customers. Because ultimately, retention is not like about just like retaining customers at all costs. Retention is about retaining revenue right? Retaining profit, and you retain revenue and profit by retaining your best value customers and growing them. And if you look at all of the best and the most successful brands in the world, the likes of Amazon and Netflix and Apple and all those guys, they've all adopted this approach, right? They've all built on this foundation. To answer your second question, yeah, definitely you can use existing customers. And I think this is a bit more, well, there's two aspects to this. One is, if you treat your best customers well, birds of a feather flock together. So people will just naturally talk about how amazing the product is. And then you'll get a lot more organic growth from customers that also have a similar profile. Secondly, obviously you can leverage things like referral programs to drive new acquisition from your existing base. And I think probably the best example of a brand that's been the most successful with that is Tesla. And obviously they, over the last several years, they did many different iterations of their referral program. They don't do any advertising. Tesla, people, when I say this, I don't think people really notice. There's no Tesla TV ads. There's no Tesla billboards. There's nothing. There's nothing. No advertising at all. All of their strategy has been based on kind of Elon's social presence, plus, and the profile he has, plus their referral program from the early days. And so they would give customers at $500. Every customer who referred another customer would get $500, and then the customer would get a credit off the back of a new Tesla. And there was examples of referrers and their referral. There's a guy's like a millionaire from referring Tesla friends. So like that's the best example. They've grown. That's how Tesla grew from the start, purely off the back of referral. And so that's kind of a tactical way of approaching it. But yeah.
I think it's interesting because I also think their product is rock solid. And I think the then comes back to the sort of moments of truth that you described, which is the product experience is brilliant. The service experience is brilliant. So you have people that are going to refer just on the back of that. And what I see a lot is that the brands, and the vast majority of brands, don't have their services aligned, products a bit of a mess, the pricing's all over the place. So they end up using marketing to try and create marketing brand moments of truth to kind of compensate for all of the underlying issues that are just too hard, too difficult to get to grips with.
Yeah, totally.
But what I think is, if you do have that understanding of lifetime value, you can then actually forensically attribute value to those service issues and product problems and pricing. So you can actually create the case for, we need to fix this because it's going to pay back in lifetime value over time.
Exactly. And then also when you calculate lifetime value, you can also build in referral into that calculation as well. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally agree with what you said there. Yeah.
And do you, I suspect you probably would agree with the sort of marketing communications and creating those marketing moments of truth is the cherry on top of the cake, but you've got to have everything else together. And those things will disproportionately more important than the marketing message at the end of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like product proposition obviously is key. And then there can be moments built into the product, like such as the way, Tesla building like the Santa sleigh at Christmas on the screen, and, the fart machine and all that sort of stuff that kind of creates organic social conversation around the product as well. But yeah, look, I mean, and from a kind of, I often work with clients in the CRM marketing space as well. And I think, CRM marketing can have a massive incremental impact on the business if it's done really well. If it incorporates behavioral science, it understands like the relationship between time to meaningful action for the individual cohort. It's relevant, it's personalized, not just on attribute, like on message, but also on frequency and cadence and moments. I see CRM marketing playing a role at moments of truth within the relationship, like, extremely important for the sectors that I work with in onboarding customers into a new product. Churn is always highest in the first 0 to 90 days across like recurring revenue, monthly flex B2C businesses that I work with. It's always the highest churn period. So onboarding done well is extremely important. And then, when I work with clients, outside the hierarchy of needs, the clients I work with, I see kind of across all of those sectors, really 4 kind of common reasons that people churn. So one is they didn't get enough early value. So that's kind of the onboarding moment. 2 is like they're paying for something and they feel guilty that they're not using it. And really that's to do with like lost momentum in life. 3 is like, I'm bored of this thing. It's like the novelty has faded, whether that's like streaming or gambling app or a sports app or a subscription app. People can just get bored of the service and therefore not want to use it or pay for it. And then fourth is what we've already talked about a little bit already, which is I don't feel valued, which is, and I'm a loyal customer and I have a very bad service experience. I see these kind of alienation messages where there's an offer that's not available to me. And so across those four dimensions, CRM can play a really important role, obviously in onboarding customers correctly, as we already mentioned. And then in terms of momentum and novelty fade, particularly in sectors like gambling, streaming, and publishing, where there's like lots of like a depth of assets that you can share. Like you can reduce novelty fade by exposing customers to things that they may be interested in and they haven't considered. And then obviously the service, so the value, I don't feel valued point. This is where people often think about loyalty programs like in a retail context just to drive repeat transaction, but like thinking about loyalty as a reward for the most highest value customers, not as a commercial mechanic to get more transactions. And then obviously also service differentiation. So I think marketing can play, particularly CRM marketing, and thinking about CRM marketing in its broadest sense, like, yeah, obviously outbound messaging, email push, in-app notifications, but also like on-site personalization experiences as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think CRM now can be baked into the product and brand experience. So it's not just the, outbound email. It is actually the app is personal, relevant, timely, and customized to some extent to you and what you want to get out of it. Or, that's all CRM. It's just injecting it into the channels and the interfaces where people are actually going to benefit from it rather than it being, just another email in their inbox.
And that's like why data is why it's so important, right?
Yeah, totally. And I guess on that, I think as we were talking about at the start, there's a sort of acquisition quality problem that becomes a retention problem. I quite often see there's the sort of acquisition stack is very separate from the customer stack. I guess is that something you
Yeah.
see as well? And that just becomes the sort of, operational barrier to actually connecting these things together and figuring out sort of diagnostically, this has been the path to purchase, this is the path to lifetime value.
Yeah, 100%. They're often, which is really ironic because often both functions, CRM marketing and acquisition, sit under the CMO, which is crazy, but they're often incredibly siloed. They might all sit in meetings together, but they don't have joined up strategies around how acquisition feeds retention. And yeah, it's a major problem that many organizations can't quite get over. And it's really driven from the back of like a desire for a short-term hit. So you can invest, there's like I think this guy, Kazan's called it like cracquisition. It's like you spend £100,000 on acquisition, then, or $100,000, then like on Monday, you can see how many subs you got. Like you get this kind of dopamine hit. Right,
Yeah.
did it work? Whereas like you spend £100,000 on retention, you will see an ROI, right? But you're not going to see it on Monday morning, right? It takes a bit of a
Yes.
while. And so often in many organizations, CMOs come from like a brand or performance background, which is kind of totally understandable because like specifically performance, because that's where all the money's spent, right? If you've got like a $15 million a year, paid spend, then your CMO really needs to understand that set to in a lot of detail. But it doesn't help in terms of driving long-term retention. So that's where you need like VPs of CRM, directors of CRM to really step above the parapet and lean out to the rest of the organization to solve some of these problems across the hierarchy rather than relying on the CMO to take ownership of it. That kind of connection between the two functions around lifetime value is what can have a massive, massive impact on retention and ultimately on overall organization profitability. But yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. I guess the last few minutes, the other thing that's sort of, we have in common is the work we're doing with agents to sort of solve some of these challenges in the round for clients.
Yeah.
One thing I see a lot is that speed isn't the same as quality. And if you look at some of the sort of automation and building complex sort of life cycle communication, there's the opportunity to do that really quickly, but that actually just creates more problems in terms of measuring the effect. Actual, should we be talking to a customer at this moment in time? it's easy to spin these things up without having the sort of rigor of actually, are we doing the right thing? So I guess with AI sort of collapsing the time it takes to build that view of the life cycle and what you want to do about it, um, has it changed things for the worse in terms of what you see going on in the sort of market?
I think that there's a lot of teams are still trying to adapt to the AI change. To be honest, I think a lot of people are like hearing the soundbite from the big tech CEOs that, you know, 90% of the workforce won't be employed because of AI, which honestly, I think, quite frankly, is nonsense. But because people are not, only have so many hours in the day and have a life as well, and they have to do their jobs, it's very hard to lean in detail into AI in the same way that you and I do, right? Because as a result of that, they don't fully understand it. So I'm seeing sort of a lot of sort of those CRM directors and retention leaders like lean into their MarTech vendors to help them to navigate the shift. I think generally, probably what you say is true. There's probably more slop around, and you see that like even just on LinkedIn, like there's more poor quality content. But from a execution perspective, I think, the way, the way I work with my clients is, strategically with senior leaders around retention holistically, but also with marketing teams around accelerating execution of lifecycle strategies using AI, and also with agents, retention agents. And so there's kind of two aspects to it. On the lifecycle strategy piece, you need, and probably many people have heard this as well, but it's just worth repeating. AI works best when it has good context. So like I built like a tension CRM marketing second brain. I've had courses, I had 2 courses, over 2,000 people have done those. I have a newsletter with like 90 episodes, like 100 frameworks. And I've ingested all of that into my knowledge base. It sits in as a subsidiary. It's basically a second brain. Then through Claude Cowork, or you can use any AI, you can map a specific client strategy to that second brain to create very high quality execution, very fast, right? So I've run a project recently with a brand the streaming brand in the Middle East, where they had nothing. Their CRM was one image based email a week sent to everybody, whether they were lapsed or not, to a program with like 1,200 hyper personalized communications. We launched it from nothing to, well, we launched it last week, so 6 weeks. And that is like, I'm to say so myself, is exceptional quality output. Like we built all the content with AI. And the reason why it's good is it because we gave it context. So this is like my second brain context, all my behavioral science principles, how you need to structure messaging, connect the headline to the subject line, to the CTA, how people don't read comms from brands, they just scan, all of that structure, plus thinking around like storytelling, people engaging with brands. And this is like really well, like people engage with brands when you tell stories about the content. And football, like, is such an easy thing to tell stories about because there's so many stories that resonate with people. So connecting the context of the tournament and the context of the how to write allows us to produce like exceptional quantity content. I've done that with 3 clients so far, and like the 95% first time right. The client in the Middle East has said they're blown away by the quality. And then the other point what AI enables now is, when I was at DAZN, I had 20 people in my CRM ops team. That's people building emails for all the different markets, like every day, right? 20. We've ingested all these 1,200 communications with all the personalized variants in 2 languages into the client's customer engagement platform, using AI, using Claude Code, and using the template API that exists within this client's engagement platform, which means all of that like building, like copying and pasting, pulling in images, is all done. It's all automated. And then in terms of like the agent side, like the promise of CRM for the last 20 years has been one-to-one marketing, but it's never been delivered, right? Never. And what we've always ended up with is cohorts of customers that look kind of similar. And we build fixed journeys within our lifecycle marketing programs, which say things like, if the customer doesn't onboard by day 7, then there's a problem. So we need to fix that. If the customer doesn't engage 4 times a week, then they're a high risk of churn. So we need to stop that, right? But actually, the reality is that every customer is different in terms of their engagement frequency. And I use the sectors I work with this metric called time to next meaningful action, which is like in streaming, you might be consumed a certain amount of content. In gambling, would be like place to deposit or place to in a subscription app. It might be doing an action related to the subscription. Like I work with a hypnosis brand, so listening to hypnosis. But everyone's time to next meaningful action will vary depending on their specific preferences, like full betting, full how they use their streaming device, et cetera, et cetera. So with AI, you can understand that at an individual level by monitoring previous habit. And then you can intervene at the right moment, not just at an attribute level, in what they're interested in, but you can also intervene at a state level. So by that, I mean, are they drifting away from their norm? Are they drifting towards greater engagement with the brand and therefore potentially greater value? Are they like showing their normal behavior? And so it all comes down to what you do, right? We both do, which is understanding the data. But what AI allows now is to be able to act on it in ways that were never really possible before. That's why I'm like a massive advocate of AI and what it can do for brands, I think, and what it can do for customer experience and business outcomes. So that's quite
Yeah.
a lot, wasn't it, to your question?
No, I certainly think, like you said, that sort of executional end of the spectrum, one-to-one marketing, deep personalization, production of assets, huge opportunity. And actually the opportunity there is about value growth. It's not about, you know, removing people and so on. It's allowing them to focus more on the strategy and shaping things and looking at, you know, actually how does the customer experience hang together? I think there's also huge opportunities in that strategy and planning. You know, all the problems that we've been talking around in terms of normalizing data from different systems so you can actually get a sense of this is how people are behaving. This is the quality of people that we're acquiring. This is what lifetime value looks like. And then using that and using agents to actually help find audiences, understand behaviors, understand interests, understand responsiveness to pricing, all of those sort of analytic models that historically been very sort of standalone or become quite sort of boilerplate. And like you say, we run it every month, and that creates a cohort that are then going to be put into this journey. You know, it can become much more dynamic, but
Lots.
AI helps with the orchestration and the activation, but it also helps with actually how could we configure this sort of experience that's going to actually create some value.
100%. Like even just like data mining tasks that you would take like, analysts sometimes months to complete can be completed in hours, and the output is extremely rich as well if you use agents in the right way. So, and things like dynamically calculating customer lifetime value and then serving customers into different journeys based on how that moves and feeding your, um, acquisition channels with refreshed profiles of who you should target and all of that. Like so much opportunity. And I like totally agree with you as well. Like I don't believe that AI will result in mass unemployment. I mean, who am I to say? But I don't believe it will. I believe that's just all like a hype call by the tech CEOs because they want investment in the business, in their products and their businesses.
Spot on.
Actually, the reality is that we're just going to be able to deliver much better quality experiences and content for our customers, and therefore drive much better outcomes for the brands that we work with. And this is why, like, whenever people talk to me about AI, and you hear people that are like annoyed about AI, I spoke to people that I don't like AI, and it's just all to do with fear, actually. And I think what I always encourage is people just to lean in and just spend time on the weekend and just build an agent in Claude, right? Just have a go.
Yeah, I
It's not
totally
actually that
agree.
hard. And Claude will tell you what you need to do. So, you don't have to be some expert. You don't have to do like an MBA in AI. Just like ask the AI and he'll tell you.
Yeah, you've got to embrace these things, and the people that embrace it will be the people that have got the jobs in the future if they know, you know, this is the capability, this is how it can be used, this is how it can actually be applied. Yeah, like you say, I think it will be a massive net positive rather than a doomsday scenario for everybody. And part of it's just the hype that's helping to prop up huge valuations and justify massive investment.
Definitely. But it does. People who just hear the hype, it makes them scared a little bit, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, but I think your hierarchy is a really good way of actually sort of navigating it and thinking about, at each level of the hierarchy, actually, how could we be using AI to do something better, faster, cheaper at each of those levels that then actually starts to build confidence that yeah, this is creating benefit for us. It's freeing up our time. It's actually delivering sales. It's improving retention, conversion. Whatever the objective is. It's a really neat framework to think about it through.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's cool. Yeah.
I think we've probably covered about 10% of what we thought we'd cover, but it's been a great conversation, Tom. Maybe we can do one again in the future, but let's.
Love to. And look, thanks so much for having me on. And what you should come on
I'd love to.
my podcast as well, and we can go for another hour on it as well.
That's it. I look forward to it. Thanks for your time, Tom. See you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.